Oh my God, so much has happened in the last 2 days. It sucks that I didn't have any time to record yesterday. I was so tired when I got home. I'm not going to give excuses, but I didn't do it. And so I'm going to have to find somehow to combine yesterday and today together. Oh my gosh. Biggest thing is the ruble news. Russia demanding to be paid in rubles for its energy is huge. Russia announcing a ruble-rupee trade agreement between Russia and India is huge. Obviously, this is going to, well, I shouldn't say it's obvious. It's not obvious, but it will domino. Russia is going to start negotiating dollar-free trade agreements with countries around the world. And once Russia starts doing it, other countries will realize, hey, you know what, maybe we don't have to use dollars. Maybe we don't want to use dollars because if we have dollar reserves in these Western banks, we could just have our assets frozen like they did to Russia. This is the point in which sanctions no longer become an issue. Sanctions, as so many of us have predicted for so long, are now self-destructive. The U.S. is imploding. That's what we're witnessing right now. Russia demanding rubles for energy, that's it. That's game over. They tried to destroy the ruble. They sent the ruble to like 154 to the dollar, and it came back down to like 100. And then Putin announced, yeah, you know what? I think we want to be paid in rubles now. And obviously, the exchange rate went down even further, meaning the value of the ruble is going up. The ruble is going to be a very valuable commodity or currency if it becomes a commodity-backed currency. Which essentially just commodity-backed is kind of the wrong term, but commodity-associated, meaning it's a currency in which you can go buy commodities with in the global market. It's kind of like the Australian dollar is very much a commodity-backed currency. Australia is, rich in coal and iron, I think, and so it's as long as the commodities trade is alive and well, the Australian dollar, assuming that the central bank doesn't go insane, is also going to be alive and well. And within a couple of years, the ruble will probably be in a similar position. It will be a player on the international stage. The U.S. is making the ruble a player because Russia's being left with no choice. Why does Russia want to hold dollars now at this point? What reason do they have? I wouldn't want dollars if I were Russia. And obviously the Russians have been planning for this for a long time. They've been moving away from dollars. They're even saying that they will accept gold as payment. Go Russia. I never thought I'd say that in my life, but, when it comes to the gold thing, I'm happy to see that. I am an old gold bug. I'm not as bad of a gold bug as like a lot of people. I think that there's, your average gold bug on the internet, your investment newsletter type guy, they're loathsome. They're just annoying and unrealistic and school-marmy, frankly. But nevertheless, it does make me smile to see someone abandoning paper dollars and saying, you know what, why don't you pay us in gold? Now, Olaf Scholz, the bumbling, newly minted Chancellor of Germany, who replaced the long-running Angela Merkel, has refused Putin's request, the media is calling it, to be paid in rubles. And he's saying, well, this goes against our contracts, blah, blah, blah. It's like, at this point, after everything that's gone on, you're concerned about, what the terms of your contract is? Well, they're changing the terms right now. Russia's saying, you know what, you want to continue to buy oil from us? Pay us in rubles. And if you want to say no, have fun staying cold. Have fun freezing to death. Have fun staying poor. Because this is obvious what Putin's doing here is this is going to nullify any attempts on trying to take down the ruble, which already failed, frankly. But the ruble is still a lot weaker than it was before this whole crisis, before the war. And so to shore up the ruble, to strengthen the ruble in the foreign exchange markets, to improve, the import power, the buying power of the Russian people vis-a-vis imports, this is a good move. Now, I should specify, Russia is only asking to be paid in rubles by enemy countries or unfriendly countries, so meaning all the countries that are sanctioning them, which I think might be a reason why, let's say, Austria is now very publicly coming out against sanctioning Russia and saying, you know what, we shouldn't do this, because I think Austria doesn't want to be labeled an unfriendly country. They want to be able to continue using their euros to buy Russian oil and gas. And Austria is, in an interesting position. They're a landlocked country, but they're also a historically neutral country. Remember, Hungary during the Cold War was behind the Iron Curtain. It was a communist country, and Austria was occupied by the Red Army after World War II, if I remember correctly. And the Allies negotiated, an agreement for the Soviets to withdraw from Austria, to allow Austria to be a free country. But Austria was going to become politically neutral or militarily neutral. It was not going to be in NATO, and it was not going to be in the Warsaw Pact. And so Austria, it's not that neutral. It's kind of like, I think it's Sweden. Sweden's not in NATO, Finland's not in NATO. Although, frankly, I was going to draw a distinction between Sweden and Finland, but I don't feel like these days Finland is any more neutral than Sweden even. And those countries are not very neutral. They're not like Switzerland. And even in this whole crisis, Switzerland has sided with the West, which has been, a bit disappointing. Because I do I've always admired Swiss neutrality. Like, the Swiss stayed out of World War II. I don't know how much more neutral you can be than that. The Nazis occupied every country around them, and the Swiss are still like, you know what, we're not going to take a position here. But now, the Austrians are, in a way, returning to form by asserting a certain degree of neutrality, by not wanting to impose these Russian energy sanctions. And I think it's just in their own rational self-interest, which, frankly, that should be the motivation behind all countries' foreign policy. Now, moving on to something else, there was this proposal by Poland and NATO to move peacekeeping troops into Western Ukraine, which sounds insane. Oh my gosh, couldn't that start World War III? Yes and no, but thankfully NATO shot this down, so from what I understand, this whole Polish incursion into Ukraine is not going to happen. But to be honest, if it did happen, if the Poles did invade Ukraine, based on what Putin said in his initial speech, it sounds like that's something that he actually would want to happen. It sounds like Putin was making the case that Stalin took, Western Ukraine, Galicia, whatever you want to call it, away from Poland and a couple other countries, Hungary, whatnot. Hungary, Romania. And that, Eastern Ukraine was historically part of Russia, and that, Ukraine, as it's currently constituted, doesn't really make much sense. And so what he was kind of saying there is that, hey, Poland, why don't you move in and take back your part of Ukraine? And the Poles seemed interested, obliged to, take up that offer at this point. And, the rest of NATO seems to have shot it down. Now, I think that this would be actually in the Russians' best interest for the Poles to do this, because the Poles would serve as a stabilizing factor if they were to seize power in Western Ukraine. If they were to go in and make it sort of a Polish protectorate, they could maybe rein in the aggression of, the future revanchist claims of, the Western Ukrainians who want to take back what will ultimately become either, a Russian-affiliated state or a part of Russia itself. Whatever portion of Ukraine is bitten off by Russia. And this is a part of Ukraine in the West that, Russia likely will never be able to tame themselves. And so, better to let the Poles deal with them. Now, the Poles probably wouldn't have such a great time trying to tame Western Ukraine either, because, from what I understand, the Poles were rather brutally expelled from Western Ukraine by people like Stepan Bandera. Western Ukraine was never a homogeneous Ukrainian area. Galicia was always a very, multilingual and multi-ethnic kingdom. And even when the Poles took it over, it was even though it was dominated by Polish people, it was still a multi-ethnic place. You had Germans, you had Jews, you had Poles, you had Romanians, Hungarians, obviously, and you had the Ukrainians. And there was, after World War I, a bit of like a civil war during the breakup of Austria-Hungary, and there was a lot of fighting in what is now called Lviv, what the Poles called Lvov, or Lvov, something, I can't remember. It's Lwow, I think, is how the Poles spell it. The Russians call it Lvov. And basically over that time, and then during World War II, the whole region seems to have been largely homogenized. There are still some minorities in Western Ukraine. The Carpo-Ruthenians apparently still exist. Milton Friedman is the only person. He's the only reason I know, what a Carpo-Ruthenian is. Apparently, his parents, he used to tell the story about how he was glad to be born in America because, if his parents hadn't immigrated to the United States at the time that they did from the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in an area that he called Carpo-Ruthenia, which is which is in that part of Western Ukraine, he would be living in the Soviet Union. Well, now, Carpo-Ruthenia, or I don't know if these territories are there. Well, the Carpo-Ruthenians are asking for autonomy now from the Ukrainian government. It's interesting to have their own sort of little separatist movement. There's also large Hungarian population, I guess, in part of Western Ukraine that was part of Hungary. Hungary is very small now, but Hungary used to be very large. Transylvania in Romania I believe, still has a very substantial Hungarian minority back from when that was a part of the Kingdom of Hungary. And this small little strip of land, kind of like the Sudetenlands, called Transcarpathia. I assume that means it's there must be some Carpathian mountains, I think, or something like that. And on the other side, that's what trans means in English. It's normally a geographical term. It's kind of silly how it's become like a social identity term. But typically it's a geographical term. It means across something like across a river or across the mountains. During the American Civil War, we had the Army of the Trans-Mississippi. Well, this area is Transcarpathia, and the Ukrainian government is now accusing Hungary of, I guess, having aims of reconquering this little strip of land. The Ukrainians, I don't know, maybe if they're just paranoid, but they're accusing the Hungarians of wanting to take back this. Again, it's a very small region, but it's something. It's kind of like South Tyrol to Austria. If you remember a few years ago, I believe it was Sebastian Kurz in Austria, granted Austrian citizenship to all of the people of South Tyrol, which is actually inside of Italy. Now, China, back to the question of China. I've been talking a lot about China this week. This war is becoming rapidly more and more about China and less about Ukraine. The U.S. is very upset that China and India are not going along with them in condemning Russia. And I guess based on this alone, the U.S. and the West is willing to burn their bridges with China and India, which I have repeatedly cautioned against. Not that anybody's listening to me. How disastrous this would be. But I don't have anything in particular on this. It's just that I'm noticing this is picking up more and more steam. And, combined with the news about the ruble from yesterday, I'm starting to think that it is a sure thing at this point that this is a turning point in, obviously world history, but American history in particular. And that, I think that looking back, a lot of people might say, okay, this was our last hurrah. This was our peak. This was the last time that the U.S. could credibly be considered, the global power, the dominant power across the globe. This is when that ended. And when that ends, the dominance of our currency will go away, and we will lose our purchasing power here at home, which has already been happening, but it would accelerate. we would not be able to keep importing more than we export year after year. We've been running a trade deficit in this country since the 1980s, and that's not normal. That means that as a country, we consume more than we produce, and we've been doing that for decades. We can only do that because of our the exorbitant privilege of holding the world's reserve currency, a privilege which we are squandering. And now we have the President of the United States acknowledging that food shortages are real and that it's not going to be fun. Obviously, we're going to have food shortages. We're going to have fertilizer shortages. And if you don't have enough fertilizer, you can't grow as much food. I mean, this war in Ukraine did not have to be a global disaster, but it's turning into one. It's certainly a disaster for the United States. And I hesitate to call it an unmitigated disaster because the mitigations are what's creating the disaster. That's why this is, the United States decided to pour gasoline on the Ukrainian fire and then pour a trail of gasoline leading all the way back here to America and igniting, a powder keg. There was no reason why this war in Ukraine should have to affect us here in America, yet it is indirectly because of the actions of our just Looney Tunes leadership. And I'm getting tired of saying this, but I mean, I have to acknowledge it every day. This is just so unnecessary. Every day I just see more and more bad news, from my perspective as an American. I've been saying this doesn't end well, but, I can't keep saying that because we're in the midst of it not being well. We're not at the end. We're right in the middle of things not being well. Things are bad. They're going to get worse. Nothing is being done to make things better. Everything is being done that can possibly be done to make things worse. Our economy is becoming resource constrained. I've talked a lot in the past. I've spent a lot of time on this channel talking about misallocation of resources and the structure of the economy and how that, could be our downfall. Sure, we have plenty of stuff, but it's not being used in efficient ways, and that's creating essentially black holes in our economy, or soft spots in your foundation. Cracks in your foundation will form, and then a sinkhole is going to open up, and you fall into a depression. Well, this is a much worse scenario. This is just a straight up, exogenous shock. It's a resource constraint. It's just we don't have the resources to maintain our economy. We can't keep producing things. And if we can't produce things, we certainly can't consume things. Because we're cutting off our own exports, or our own imports. We're telling the exporters, you know what? You know how we have this arrangement where I give you green pieces of paper and you send me stuff that has value? I don't think I want your stuff anymore. I'm good with my green pieces of paper. And now people are experiencing this massive inflation. And what's the answer that's being floated by the Democrats now? We need to send people $300 a month for fuel? We need gas stimmies? I mean, every possible terrible decision that could be made is being made. They're doing everything that you could possibly do to ruin this country. And I don't say that. I'm not hyperbolic. I'm not a partisan. And the whole time Trump was in office, I complained about him too. But this really is so much worse. And this is not a bash Democrats channel. That's not what I'm about. I've never made my channel about bashing Democrats. And it's not like the Republicans are much better. They still want all the warmongering with Russia. They are still terrible on a lot of this stuff. But at least the Republicans are not advocating at this moment to throw gasoline on the inflation fire. I think I'm going to have to really sit down and condense my thoughts about what I think that the next 5 years is going to look like, because it's clear at this point that there's a very high chance that things are going to come apart. And that's all I'm going to say for right now. I will see you folks back here tomorrow. I'll commit to that. I'm not going to miss 2 days in a row on a week. So, bye-bye.